Good evening to all my brothers and sisters in Christ and creation. It is good that you are here this evening. And I just pray that you've had a good day today on this Wednesday, the 29th of January 2025. And I just pray that you would just like and share our Bible study with your friends, with your family, um, with your co-workers, whoever they may be. Share, like, and share, particularly on YouTube, which is probably the best place to catch it. But we're also on Facebook as well and YouTube, and I think we're going to be on TikTok in these coming days. So I am Dr. Lewis Tait, Jr., pastor of the Village Church here in Washington, D.C., and we thank you for joining us. Thank you for your support. And also, we want to remember our theme for this year, which is courageous faith for the journey. Courageous faith for the journey. And we are just grateful, even in the midst of the challenges and the things that we are facing as a country, as a people, in other countries, and people who are affected by the people that we have in leadership. And we know that a lot of decisions are unjust. We know that a lot of decisions are not taken into account the good of all people, but just the progress and the greed of a few. And what we have to continue not only to pray, but we have to resist and be involved in organizing, because we cannot just sit back and not do anything. And so I thank you for joining us. This is our second Bible study, so lesson number 2 for the spring session. So I want you to just pray with me, and then we're going to dive into our lesson for tonight. And we also are grateful for many of you who joined us this morning for prayer on Wednesdays. And we're grateful that you took the time out to be with us. We had quite a group this morning, and we encourage you every Wednesday at 6:30 to join us and go to our website and get the login information. You do not have to be a member of our church to join our prayer. Just join, and it's 15 minutes, 6:30 to 6:45. And so we encourage you to do that. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you for this time we have to share, to look into these ancient texts, these stories, these narratives of a people who were learning to engage with you, people who were learning what it meant to have a God, a God of justice, a God who was lifting all people, but their particular story, particularly the Hebrew people and others that are incorporated in their story, is interest to us, because perhaps we can learn some lessons that will help us in the 21st century to be people of justice, to be people of love, to be people of hope, people of empathy for others. God, I pray now that you allow the genius of the Holy Spirit to use my mind to speak through my mouth, but you have your own way. And allow all of us, those who are listening, those who may hear this lesson at a different time, to be engaged with the scriptures, to wrestle so that we can learn to really live them out and not use the scriptures or the Christian walk as a way to oppress any group. This is my prayer. In Yeshua's name, amen. So listen, tonight we want to just dive into um, this second installment here of what we are dealing with. And I am also preaching through this too, is captured but not conquered. And this is lesson number 2. And tonight I want to just focus sort of the teaching moment, if you will, on just 2 verses of chapter 1. And that's verses 3 and 4 of Daniel, chapter 3, verses 3. And I encourage you to read the entire chapter, but particularly verses 1 through 17. For it really constitutes the context of which I am teaching and preaching. But for tonight, we just want to just focus in on these 2 verses, verses 3 and 4. And they read this way from the Good News translation of the Bible, translated from the Masoretic text. And it says, the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief official. And remember, Ashpenaz was a eunuch, to select from among the Israelite exiles some young men of the royal family and of the noble families. They had to be handsome, intelligent, well trained, quick to learn, and free from defects. It's an important aspect. Free from defects. That's very interesting. And so they would be qualified, listen to this, to serve in the royal court. Ashpenaz was to teach them to read and write the Babylonian language. And also, I wanted to give this lesson tonight a subtitle, and it's simply is this: don't be fooled. We got skills. Don't be fooled. We got skills. Let's dive into this for a minute. If I were to pose a question tonight, and you were to write it in your comment lines, it would be a simple question like this: why would the captors, that's the Babylonians, be so inclined to teach Daniel and his boys and other Hebrew young men to read and write the Babylonian language? Think about that for a minute. Why would the captors, and I think I'm going to put that question up on the screen so you can see it, well, why would the captors be so interested? Why would they insist, if you will, that the Daniel and his boys would learn the Babylonian language, to read it and to write it? Why was that so important? Why was that so essential? And that's a question we ought to think about. We ought to ponder. We ought to want to understand, and not skip over. Why would the captors Babylon be so inclined to teach Daniel and his boys and other Hebrew young men to read and write the Babylonian language? Why was that so important? Why? So let's look at it for a moment, all right? Let's examine it. First, let's look at the setting. You're talking about the Babylonian exile. Why? And Daniel and his friends, they were taken captive. This was a significant biblical sort of historical event. And it happened. One of the troubling things, and I didn't really include in this lesson, is that verse 2 suggests that God sort of let this happen. And there's discussions around whether God let things happen, because we know God is sovereign, or whether or not the Hebrew people did something to put themselves in this position, or whether or not this is a lesson that they needed to learn. There's a lot of things that we could think about, a lot of ways we could go, but I don't really want to dig down and deep in that tonight. But I do want to deal with this whole idea, the challenges that these black people in New Babylon, that these Hebrew people faced in Babylon. We are in New Babylon, and the pressure to conform to a culture that is antithetical to theirs, culture of we versus the New Babylonian culture like ours that has an emphasis on I. There is a man I think that you would want to at least explore. Here's a short film, and you probably can view it. but it's by seven linguists, and it's called Exterminate All the Brutes. Exterminate All the Brutes. And I bring that up because um, it's important for us to look at some of the things that he said that will give us some insight into this text. And also some things that Howard Zinn talked about in his book, um, A People's History, A People's History of the United States. So these two particular authors, Lindquist and Howard Zinn, really can help us sort of get a grasp on what we're dealing with in this text. Because both of them address the complexities of race, power. Most of us don't like to talk about power. We 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 uh, we act as if power is never in the equation, but it's power is not in and of itself evil, but how power is used. It's just like money. Money is not bad, but it says the scripture talks about the that money at times is the root of all, the love of money, not the money itself, but the love of money. There's a descriptor, the love of it is often the root of all evil. But these two authors, they both address the complexities of race and power and legacies of colonialism and slavery. And their works critique sort of the historical narrative surrounding European colonization and the enslavement of Africans, highlighting their intelligence, their skills, and resilience of our African ancestors who were enslaved. And I just want to drop a few things on Seven Linguists and Exterminate All the Brutes and what he said. He explores the brutal history of colonialism and its consequences. It mainly focuses on how European powers justified their actions through dehumanization. And he investigates the underlying ideology that led to the exploitation of colonized people, including Africans. So when we look at this text, and these Hebrew young men, they really have been colonized. They have been captured, and now they're being forced. In the text that we have just read, they're being forced to learn to read and write the Babylonian language. Now, I asked you a question earlier. Why would the captors, the Babylonians, be so inclined to teach these boys, Daniel and his boys, and other Hebrew young men, to read and write the Babylonian language? Why was that so important? And that's something we have to wrestle with, because it is an important question, and it really can help us to sort of deal with what we are dealing with in our modern day and in our modern time. The same kind of sort of forced upon us, learning to read and write in a language that is not ours. Our ancestors had to deal with this. They had to function. And also, we are the recipients, our education and how we've been enculturated to think that someone else's education, someone else's language is more important than ours. So here's that question I want you to keep in your mind. Why? Why would the captors, the Babylonians, be so inclined to teach Daniel and his boys and other Hebrew young men to read and write the Babylonian language? I want you to keep that in your mind. Now, the thing is, we also read earlier that these young men, these Hebrew young men, they came with skills. They came with a set of skills. They came with a certain knowledge. Go back to the text with me for a moment. If you haven't left, first of all, they were selected from among the Israelite exiles, some young men of the royal court. So they selected some young men from royal families and noble families. They had to be handsome. They had to be intelligent. They had to be well trained, quick to learn, and free from physical defects. So they just didn't go out and randomly get people. They really went out and found folks with skills. So we also know that linguist talks about how these Africans who were enslaved in the diaspora here in America, South America, the islands and the Caribbean and all over, that they were highly intelligent. Our ancestors, they had skills, and also they possessed a sense of resilience. How else would they have survived, or we would be the recipients of their resilience because we are here? And when you think about it, slavery was brutal. In this case, it necessarily you're captured. It does not. It's not fun to be captured, but in the history of the world, there's been no sort of this. The enslavement of African people have been a sort of a brutal history of colonialism, and its consequences mainly focuses on how European powers justified their actions through dehumanization, and and exploitation, and that includes our ancestors. But linguists also acknowledge that Africans, they had this sophisticated agricultural practices. So a lot of the crops that the colonialists and the plantation owners and the enslavers profited from is because our ancestor had sophisticated agricultural practices and skills before they were captured. So that suggests they had these skills before they came here, and also how those skills were exploited by those who captured them, and those and their abilities, and they also their physical capabilities, and their cultural knowledge was crucial for agricultural production. It's like these Hebrew young men. King Nebuchadnezzar knew that he wanted, first of all, to work in the royal court, but he also knew it would be an advantage for him and for his court if they were working for him. See, capturing the best and the brightest from a conquered population enabled the oppressor to benefit. Listen to this, people. Benefit from their abilities. This strategic selection ensured that the talents of these Hebrew young men primarily could be harnessed, and I'm pretty sure there were women as well that's not mentioned in the scriptures, could be harnessed for the benefit of the Babylonian Empire, illustrating sort of a more pragmatic approach to governance than mere brute force, as was experienced pretty much in the Middle Passage, by separating ancestors, separating tribes, by dismembering people, like when you go and study the Congo, and and what was done to them through King Leopold, and the raping of their land, of the resources. But we've got to understand, even today, when you look at what's happening in the United States, because it seems like we are disposable now. We are disposable. We're not thought of as needed as much, and so because when people really are fearful of you disappearing from the scene, and the country not being able to be as productive or be as profitable as it was, they would go through great lengths to make sure that doesn't happen. When you go back and read about Marcus Garvey, his movement back to Africa, I mean, one of the reasons why he was discredited and basically sent back to Jamaica and deported, because he was a real threat, because he put the idea in many of our African ancestors in their minds and in their consciousness that they had a choice, that they could leave here and perhaps lead a better life. And after all these years, he was pardoned back, I think, in the 40s or late 50s, but he was again pardoned by Joe Biden as he left office. Kind of interesting. So I don't know if this was a full pardon, but it's posthumously because he's deceased, and maybe it will mean something for his family. I'm not sure. But the issue is that we as African people, we came here just like these Babylonian Hebrew young men, with stuff, with skills, with intelligence. That's why I told you in the beginning to don't be fooled. That's why I told you to don't be fooled. Because many of us, for some reason, we have sort of bought into the notion or the idea that that all that we gain is for from our coming to this country. Matter of fact, the way the oppressor changes the narrative, it was somehow beneficial for African people to be enslaved. And 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 I want to go deep into the whole Christian narrative, but that somehow we needed to be Christianized because we were savages. Of course, we needed to be saved, but saved to go to heaven, but not saved enough to participate in the system that they call democracy. And so don't be fooled, folks. Don't be fooled. We've got skills. We've got skills. So I hope you're getting this lesson tonight. I know it may be a little stinging, but we've got skills. And our ancestors had skills. So let's dive into a little bit more what Lindquist had to say. He situates enslavement of Africans within the broader historical context of exploitation and dehumanization. That's important to understand because it didn't. The we look at these Hebrew young men. It seems like they were treated with some sense of dignity, even though they were captured. Being captured, and I'm not trying to make it out to be fun or wonderful, but you don't hear about them being brutalized or dehumanized. Of course, their language was sort of being devalued because now they're being taught to read and write the Babylonian language. They're being taught to do that because that's an important thing for them to have because they're being they're being brought into the system, and the system is saying this language is important for you to learn, and your language is not as important. We want you to learn this language. Matter of fact, the Old Testament, a lot of it was written in Hebrew, and then this book of Daniel, I guess the first chapter and two is Hebrew, and the rest of it is written in Aramaic. And Aramaic was the language of the Babylonians. And remember, very interestingly enough, that Jesus spoke Aramaic, so you can see the influence of how empires, how people who are oppressors, how long after their dominance is over, their influence still kinds of lingers on. Um, uh, and see, by emphasizing the valuable attributes of those enslaved, um, you know, what happens is Lindquist helps us understand this is a critique, the notion that they were inherently inferior, our people. So I think King Nebuchadnezzar knew that these people, that wasn't his issue. He didn't consider them to be inferior. But our oppressors wanted to create a narrative that somehow that we, as African people, were and still are inferior. And that's why this whole argument around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is just uh, dismantling it is just another way of suggesting that somehow black folks are, if we're in position, we don't deserve to be there. There's has never really been a redress for at least 250 years of slavery. There has really been an acknowledgement of all the things that have been done. And now, after we've made certain gains, all of those want to be rolled back. And even some black folks think that I don't need DNA, DEI. Well, it's not just for us. First of all, it's trying to create a society that's more diverse, that's more equitable, and that's more inclusive. And you think about that in a logical way. You think about what is so wrong with that. Well, you have created a notion that certain people are superior and certain people are inferior. That doesn't fit your model because you really don't want an inclusive kind of nation, and you want some certain people left out and certain people who are brought in. Or if we go back to classism, you want to keep people sort of in their places, and that's one of the things that challenges a lot of us, is that we are in this particular in this empire, and this is what we are dealing with, a caste, more of a caste system. Isabella Wilkerson talks about it in her book, The Origins of the Discontents. And also there's a movie made about it in terms about the caste system. So there's a place, and if you study caste, everybody has a place. And so we come back to this text and we look at the importance of why it was important to teach these young men, these Hebrew young, and there were others. And I'm pretty sure this included women too, because when they captured, we're not, that's interesting, we're not even told about the women, but they captured them too. And they were probably made to do things against their own will. And so when you think about that, it's important when you, as a oppressor, you want everybody marching lock, stock, and barrel to the same orders and understand the same thing. So you want them to be able to read. You want them to be able to write in a language that they understand, that the oppressor understands. It's important, and just the converse for us in terms of African people. There was a big difference in terms of us, because we as African peoples, our oppressors, did not want us to read. They did not want us to write. Matter of fact, it was against the law for us to read or to write. All right, let's go back for a second. So teaching these Hebrew young men to read and write in the Babylonian language would help to facilitate their integration, as these individuals could serve as intermediaries between the Babylonian power structure and other exiled cultures, and potentially aiding in the assimilation of conquered peoples, ensuring loyalty to the Babylonian crown. We see that today, and we pocket parenthetically today. We see that today in the person who's down on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, who goes after people who are not loyal. And that's the whole thing about the birth thing around integration. Like if you were born here, but you are a Mexican or Guatemalan, that you're more loyal to your country than you are. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd, but that's the argument. But also, the 14th Amendment really was put in place to ensure that African people at the time would be U.S. citizens. So that, there's a slippery slope that's being walked here that could affect us as African people. And maybe that's their long-term gain, is to disenfranchise us, which they've been working on doing since we've been here. So this notion of teaching them was an important thing, because now they want them to assimilate into their culture. That's what it seems that happens to us. The more you assimilate, the more you forget who you are. The more you assimilate, the more you deny even your own selfhood, your own agency. Even when it's antithetical to you, we are people about community, about communal. That's a part of our history, where this structure, this empire, is about individualism. It's about making people feel like I'm good, or the greatness of, this American triumphalism, which as a people we always push back, because that's why they want us to be invisible. That's why they want to erase Black History Month, because when they want to talk about how great America is, or make America great again, they got these group of people saying, "Oh, wait, pump the brakes a little bit. We served in the military, but when we came back home, we didn't get the same rights as other military persons. You don't want to teach about the Tuskegee Airmen, but they helped to save your behinds in the World War." So this when you got these people chirping in the corner about no, back up, you're not so great. You really want to get rid of those individuals. You want to make sure they're not around. But the difference though in treatment of African Americans in the slavery period, antebellum period, um, and it's still when you think about education today, how woeful it is. How even today we've got to be careful. And there's nothing. I'm not saying everybody needs to go to college and get a college degree, but we should never diminish the value of education. All right, and sometimes we want to poo-poo on education, but it is how the educational system has been co-opted and is complicit with a certain narrative that's going on now. You know, you got a place like Harvard University probably has one of the biggest endowments of any university in the world, billions and billions of dollars. And here they're talking about they're getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You would think they would be like Costco's and others who say, no, we're going forward. We're going to make sure that we are diverse, that we deal with equity, and we have inclusion. But no, they want to go backwards with all of the resources that they have. Incredible. So, but suppression of literacy, and I know I'm getting to the close. In contrast, in terms of the American story versus these Hebrew young men, the oppression of enslaved Africans in America involves systemic denial of education. Slaveholders forbade enslaved individuals, I said earlier, to read or write in order to what? Maintain control and prevent rebellion. Because when people are reading and they're writing and they're thinking, guess what? They're critically thinking about what you are telling them. And they know what you're telling them because now they're thinking critically. When you tell them the sky is red and they see the sky is blue, they know that you're lying. You know, they have a way of thinking now critically because now they're reading. When you take out sections of the Bible that you don't want them to read, you take out the Exodus stories, and you think about any stories of liberation and Hebrew people rebelling against other countries or other entities. You take those parts out, but you leave in the part in the New Testament where it says slaves obey your masters in the Lord, for this is right. You leave in the part when Romans talk about, obey those in government, because that's a really misused text, as if whoever's in government, God put them there. That's just, to me, that's just lazy hermeneutics and lazy exegesis of any text to suggest that whoever's in government, that God put them there. And of course, people say, well, God allowed it. That's another, I think, lazy way to look at it. Some things that happen, and many things that happen in our world, in our own personal lives, have nothing to do with God, but everything to do with us, and not the devil either. It's things that we do. It's just like in the Garden of Eden. They had every opportunity to do. God had given them what we call free will to make decisions, whether it was against God or with God or for God. They chose to do what they did. All right. And we can go use that story and like they did and blame the Satan and then Adam blames Eve and all this kind of stuff. They're going back and forth. But the thing is, they had the ability because God had given it to them. Because God said, I made them, mean Adam and Eve, in my image and my likeness, and in our likeness. And that means they had the capability of making decisions in different ones that they made. And so when you think about it, with the slaveholders, they forbid the enslaved individuals to read and write in order to maintain control and to prevent rebellion. And we destroyed Nat Turner. He was reading, and of course, when he started preaching differently, and then he understood that something was wrong with the way they wanted him to preach, and he started a rebellion. They made sure he died. We always got to be careful too. Let me park it parenthetically for a moment again. Sometimes there are people in our ranks who are FBI informants. There are people in our ranks who are turncoats. There are people in our ranks who look like us, but they're not us. There are people in our ranks who have so much self-hatred and self-loathing that they almost I guess they don't wish they were who they are. It's like there's something wrong with being created in the image and likeness of God as an African person, as a black person, as a person of color. And let me say this, God made us all, but when we're talking about this American context, we've got to talk about because they created it, this whole idea of race and who is superior and inferior. And right now we're dealing with white supremacy at their highest level in our government. So literacy also can be seen as a potential threat to the institutions of slavery, as an educated individuals could organize, could communicate, and inspire resistance against the oppressors. That's why it was so important for them not to teach us. But in the case of these Hebrew persons, King Nebuchadnezzar sort of saw them as, I hate to use this term, but allies. And also he felt that if he could get them to assimilate, the best way is to teach them the language and how to write like the Babylonians. Mm-hmm. He saw it as an advantage. Now, they were captured. They weren't doing this because they necessarily wanted to, but he saw, from their perspective, this biblical perspective, it was better to have an educated captured person or an enslaved person than an uneducated one, because they didn't see. They may have saw their culture as more superior, but the way they saw it, y'all need to learn this so we can help to assimilate y'all. Now, the prohibition against literacy for enslaved Africans served as a psychological function as well. It reinforced the perception of Africans as inferior. Don't miss that. That's why I said don't be fooled. We got skills. It reinforced this perception of Africans as inferior, incapable of complex thought and agency. This dehumanization justified their enslavement and exploitation, whereas the Babylonian captors aimed to elevate select individuals for legislative and administrative roles within their own system. So they had select individuals, but they did have some individuals that they selected, that will learn in the ways of the Babylonians. Unlike the Babylonians who taught the exiled young men to read and write their language, American slaveholders primarily taught enslaved Africans to speak English. This linguistic constraint limited enslaved ability, the enslaved ability to communicate among themselves and with outsiders autonomously. In other words, because many of our ancestors, they came from different tribes, they had different languages, and now you're teaching them this foreign language, and some of them don't know it, or if they're learning it, it's like me trying to learn Spanish and trying to communicate. It will take me a while, which further contained the threat of insurrection. It served to break cultural ties, suppress any nuanced form of resistance. You got to understand that that's the method to this. And even now, we got to be careful. As I come to a close, there's so much news that's popping out. There's so much that's going on. If we are not careful, what happens is we will tune out when we should be tuning in. All right? Don't you remember this again? Don't be fooled. We got skills. Even today, we are thinking people. We are people of compassion. We are people of great resilience. We are people of hope. We are people of God. We are people who have this spirit to never give up. And even in spite of, and as my sister patient said this morning, we've got to pray for government workers. Many of them are African American persons who work in the federal government, whose jobs they want to eliminate. Yes, we know there's waste in the government, but this is not a way to just blow up everything and get rid of everybody. There's a lot of waste in corporate America. We won't even talk about the military. We got over 750 to 800 military bases throughout the world. Why so many? What's the point? Of course, they would tell you that we're protecting what? From whom? Right? We need that much protection more than any other country in the world. We have all of these military bases all over the place. You got to ask yourself, what is that about? Why? Why so many? But those are the questions a lot of times we don't raise, we don't ask. And so let me stop there. Listen, I want to thank you again for your support of the village through your tithes, your offerings, And even though this is the middle of the week, you may not have given the chance to give on Sunday, or you forgot. You can still give through Givelify, through Cash App to support us. And I teach the 10-10-80 principle. I'm not going through that tonight. But I also just want you to support our church. Maybe you can give $5 or $10 or something on a regular basis to support the work that we do, to support the message that we're putting out. And that's all I ask from you. Listen, I want to thank you again for just tuning in. Don't forget, next Wednesday we'll be here again. We'll dive a little deeper. I just got hit the surface tonight, but don't be fooled. We got skills. We've always had skills. Listen, God, I pray that you bless the rest of this week. Bless our safety. Bless our health. Bless our finances. And God, help to keep our minds. This is my prayer. In Jesus' name, amen. Don't forget to tune in on Sunday at 9 a.m. or 11:30 for our worship experience at the village. God bless.